Morning, I'm Chris Smith, with principal with Jacobs Engineering from our commissioning and energy practice. I'm going to commit the speaker cardinal sin of saying, be sure you, on your phone, go to the app, check in, get your CEUs, okay? Now, that's not to say stay on your phone the whole time, but hopefully I'm not that boring for you. So, unfortunately, Rob Bucey was not able to make the trip this time. He had a family scheduling issue that came up afterwards, so he left me by myself. So, also, let me put in a quick plug for all of you who may not be EMPs. As president of EMA, I'm going to put the plug in of, if you're not an EMP, you should be. Hopefully you saw and heard more about some of the reasons to be an EMP in the plenary yesterday. But that's not what you came in here today for. So we're going to talk a bit about total cost of ownership and what that means in terms of value engineering and what we offer to our clients, and especially just the concept of looking to the future. All right, nice fancy look here. This is challenging today, reinventing tomorrow. Our company tagline, you might say, and really it fits well with what we look at from a commissioning and energy perspective, particularly relative to total cost of ownership. We need to challenge what that thinking is today, what that concept is that is being thrown on the table for the owners, and then reinventing what that means in operations down the road. Learning objectives for this, and really focusing again, you'll see the words total cost of ownership scattered throughout, and then also value engineering. Again, we'll talk through a few of those mindset and comments, and really what is TCoO, and then also VE, what that impact can be. And I've got a few examples up there of some considerations that may not have gone the right way, and I know that many of you have those as well. So, total cost of ownership. You've probably heard that term thrown out. You've probably seen it written. You probably may have used it. But really, what are we talking about? It starts all the way from the acquisition point. And this is something to educate to our clients. They may not even realize that they're thinking about it, but it does impact them all the way through. All the way from that acquisition. What is that cost? We are very familiar with first costs. Installation. You see that all the time. O&M. What our perspective brings to O&M. But then also, another one that most, especially design teams, don't always consider is, what's it mean at the end of the life? What that costs to deal with it? And that goes way beyond just, can you replace something? One of the favorite things that I can recall of walking on a university campus with a facility manager and walking by a building and seeing second story up, very interesting, completely different colored brick pattern. I said, oh, that's kind of an interesting feature. Didn't look like anything else in the building. It goes, yeah, that's where we had to take out the side of the building to replace an air handler. So, and they couldn't find the brick after 50 years. So you find those things all the way through the life cycle. We want to talk about engaging a long-term mindset. We're not talking about just, can you design it, can you build it, can you even operate it, but is it reliable? Does it work? Are you designing, are you constructing with the concept of the mission of that? And I say mission, you're probably automatically thinking DoD or something like that. And that's not the limit. It may be, what is the mission or the goal or the operation of that particular facility that you're looking at? And this goes all the way through. Again, all the way through, down through renewal, repair, decommission. But what we're really thinking on is how to bring that concept all the way through. When a project is conceptualized at the C-suite or command level, they may not be thinking, they're thinking, I've got to do this to get this mission. But if you think in terms, and you bring your perspective to the client of a reliability-centered approach of how, not only, we talk often about how we're going to operate it and maintain it, but what does that mean down the road? What does that mean for that, not the operators you're dealing with today, but the third set of operators of that facility, 20, 30 years away? How many are working with projects with owners who are talking about 50-year facilities? Yeah, you're probably seeing that. If you're working particularly federal, that's in a lot of the guidelines. You're talking about healthcare, that's in a lot of the guidelines, although technology changes so fast for that, we're talking about a redesign every 5 years. But you've got to think now, and we want to do risk assessment for these later cycles to understand what that impact is today. And that's a perspective that we bring, just not because we're not interested in first cost, we are. Not because we're not interested in how to build it, we are. But we have to look at what is not just now. And that's part of what the concept of commissioning has always been, right? It's always been, hey, we're not looking at just this one section. But to go beyond that is really promoting to your client, promoting to the industry overall, what is the total cost of ownership for that item, for that asset? And it may just be even looking at it on individual decisions in the design and construction process. What is the total cost of ownership from that decision? And I'll talk about a few of those in a minute. We want to look at and promote looking at risk early. And no, I'm not here to talk about everything related to risk management. And that, I think we could talk a few hours on that, right? But we're talking about everything from identifying what that eventual impact is on that, but also designing and understanding what does it mean to build in that reliability. What does it mean in terms of equipment selection? What does it mean in terms of layout? What does it mean in terms of setting up for operations? We're designing in that reliability-centered concept, because it's not just today that you're looking at. You're looking at way on down the future. And we're talking about way on down the future at the end of the warranty time frame That's just the beginning. We're talking way further out there. You've probably seen this type of slide before. 75% of the cost of an asset is after operation starts. If you're in healthcare, mission critical, those type facilities, I'm going to tell you, highly technical facilities, that's 80% plus. Okay? We often look at just this very first section. And, the design and construction teams oftentimes are in those first 3 bars only. And we know that coming in, but we have to think along the way and talk to the owners that we're looking at what is this other 75, 80%. What's that mean? And it's not just energy. We know energy is a huge component of that. We know maintenance is a huge component of that. Replacement, something that doesn't always come up a lot of times. We talk about how to replace it, but are you going to be able to replace it with something that can do that mission? Now, we all know technology changes. Pick up your phone, you're probably if you got it this year, you're probably 2 generations out of date. We know that changes, but we have to engage that total cost thought process at the beginning. Because, honestly, on a project team, oftentimes we're the only ones thinking down that far. You get the facility staff engaged, and hopefully you're able to get facility staff engaged from the operations side. A lot of times they're thinking day one operations. Okay, when you hand me the keys, what's going to happen? And that's where they need to be thinking. We've got to bring that perspective of not just when I hand you the keys, what's going to happen, but what's going to happen out here. What's going to happen out here? How does that work for the client? The C-suite levels, they understand, and the command levels, they understand when you start talking about risk. They understand when you start talking about long-term outlook reliability. And that's where we have the opportunity to change not only what's done in construction, but actually work that into that design. I know oftentimes we're brought into the construction phase as well, and a lot of those decisions are already made. But you have to look at even those decisions during construction on how they impact farther on down the road. And a lot of times you see the concept that may be considered almost the complete opposite of total cost of ownership in terms of one of our favorite topics, value engineering, right? Often hear it described as neither value nor engineering, right? So we talk about, what is that? What does it really mean? Value, worth of something. Engineering, I'm hoping that you all understand that one. And then we talk a bit about owner's project requirements. It's whether TCoO is really thought about into that owner's project requirements. But some of the things that we look at and what we need to fold into the OPR is work with our clients to identify that performance criteria, that cost considerations. What are those success criteria? And broaden that beyond today. Broaden that beyond first day of operations and look way to the future. So when we deal with value engineering and trying to bring that total cost of ownership mindset to it, we all have a lot of experiences varied with that. So what's the typical versus what is the ideal? Typical, it's first cost and schedule. Most of the time, first cost and schedule is what drives that. What do we need to be promoting? Value. Bring it back to that value. Value on improving the worth. Still meeting the OPR. Still driving it to that. Typical, focused on the budget. Ideally, life cycle, total cost of ownership. What is the entire look? How many have been through a value engineering, contractor-driven value engineering process? Come on. All right. How many have been through value engineering processes with the entire project team? And not as many, right? There's a lot of different perspectives when you do it that way. A lot of different concepts. And a lot of different considerations for that particular item. Have you ever been to a project that had shared savings? We've seen projects where contractor, they bring an idea, shared first cost savings. And that can really skew that approach. That can really skew what their look is. That's great if it drives their engagement in producing that value, but how often is functionality considered? How often are all of the aspects of that considered? Value engineering usually is system or component focused, changing out that gear or that material or that air handler or that system for a slightly different one, versus looking at the whole of the impact, not just the change here, but what does it bring across the entirety of the project and the project life. Typically, value is defined as that impact to that first cost and schedule, but we have to look at it and promote it as value defined as improvement to that life cycle overall, that total cost of ownership. And that brings us back to, sorry, a little too quick, that typical team that you see. Sometimes you'll see the AE team. Usually it's major subs, maybe the construction manager and the contractor. Who do we really look for? The AE team. On this portion of the slide, the AE team sometimes should be eliminated, and that should be always. Owner's facility management team, energy manager, I'm sure commissioning agent, hopefully. You've got to bring that, gives that well-rounded perspective to any VE discussion. Give a few case studies on some of that relative to what's happened, what we've seen with some projects, and what's gone right or not so right. So in this particular example, area that's got some utility issues occasionally in the Gulf Coast, red hurricanes or tornadoes. This facility was set up to be able to operate in island mode. Cut off all the utilities, they can still operate as a healthcare facility. So the value engineering approach had a big value engineering effort, and they wanted to reduce the cost of some of the various tanks and the fuel farm area. So they knocked it back from 5 days to 7 days. By the way, the facility staff did not know this until they took over the facility at turnover. They thought they were getting 7. That was a very interesting meeting to set in, by the way. Can reduce cost controls. Valve for a water tank changed to manual. You're thinking, okay, not a big deal. Down an 8-foot hole. So if you think, if you're going into island mode as storm avoidance, it's great weather, right, to be going down an 8-foot hole in the middle of the utility yard. So that's and that, by the way, is the one critical valve that makes the domestic and processed water go to island mode. So kind of important. And they just reduced the capacity to be able to run in their island mode. Again, the facility management staff found that out, that change had been made at turnover. Again, not super happy about that. Fortunately, they haven't had to test more than a couple of days at a time yet. There's another project trying to cut $80 million from the project. For some of our electrical friends here, that you'll probably appreciate this a little more. They changed the specifications on the conductors to aluminum. That was the contractor's idea. But the owner did not require that change to be updated into the documents. They didn't want to pay the DOR to update the VE requirements on that project. Well, distribution panels for the central plant arrived. Guess what? They're copper. So that they had to be reordered after they'd been delivered. 6-week delay in completion of the panels and permanent power. And we all know 6 weeks delay in permanent power on a major construction project and a big campus level project is always a really good one. And again, rolls back to not doing that, taking that VE all the way through and understanding what that impact is down the road. During another hospital renovation that we ran into, they wanted to reduce the MEP systems capacities, again, cost savings, but not thinking of what that impact is down the road. They wanted to reduce the BAS controls, and we came in a little bit late on this project, and while they thought reducing pressure monitoring in this case was a good idea, we never did find out who came up with that one. Nobody admitted to it afterwards. So that resulted in general lack of control and a lot of rework after the fact. Again, not being able to look at what is that impact down the road. And another favorite one, and sorry, I probably should have obscured the logo up there. I'm sure nobody's ever, ignore that one. So I wanted to reduce the cost across this multiple building campus. And so they decided after the design was done, they were going to do a VE approach with design assist from the contractor. So for this outpatient building, they decided to go with 3 large air handlers on this 7-story building. That changed from what was originally 18 distributed air handlers throughout the facility. Another side point was that they didn't change the floor plate layout, so you had nice mechanical rooms that were completely empty, except for some duct going through them throughout. But they also didn't consider what that does to operations and that whole sequence of sequences and controls of what they could do with the spaces. Well, that didn't account for the fact that certain floors ran longer than others. And certain others, they eliminated, and again, for some unknown reason, that and we weren't able to completely overturn, the use of unoccupied mode. Didn't require the controls contractor to program it in. They VE'd that one out. Well, if you know outpatient buildings, what happens at about 5, 6 o'clock on every day? They're done. Well, and if you have other departments in there that may go longer or earlier, well, when you change that and you don't give that zoning, don't use that separation, and you don't have the controls contractor set up those systems in their programming, it's to be honest, it's an energy hog by comparison. When the energy manager saw this, at one of the turnover meetings, literally threw up his hands and said, "Who's got the rest of my energy budget?" And again, that's one of those things that they didn't think on what is tomorrow. They thought about what is today, what's the first cost, and the controls contractor thought, what can I get away with? But they didn't think about what's tomorrow. Another healthcare facility. This one, they decided to use fewer larger air handlers as a cost savings. So some of those they made into single fans. Single fan, 75 horsepower motors. Okay. I could probably understand that and consider it, for some maybe back of house areas, admin areas. No, these were patient rooms and surgical suites. So this one's still under construction currently. But we've fought this quite a ways, but weren't able to get that overturned either, because they didn't, again, weren't thinking of tomorrow. So anybody have an experience with trying to change out a 75 horsepower motor on the quick? It's not on the quick, is it? It doesn't happen very fast, and that's if you have one. We've already been discussing with the facility staff about what is really your list of critical spares. Let's talk about tomorrow now. What is that list of critical spares you have to have? All of a sudden, a 75 horsepower motor is on that list. And the rigging to be able to move it around and out of the warehouse and up to the penthouse. But again, it's not considering what that tomorrow brings. For a success story, though, I want to talk about looked at a 4-story medical office building. You see them all across the country. This one, the particular design was air-cooled chiller, roof-mounted air handlers. As part of a shared savings program, and I mentioned that one earlier, contractor wanted to reduce it to DXRTUs. And the construction manager was very seriously thinking about it. He really wanted to go that way. You know, you ever met a construction manager that has more than plenty of budget? I haven't yet. If you do meet them, I would really like to find out and get on that project. We worked with the facility management lead and brought in the concept of that energy budget. Who's paying for that operations? Who's paying for that performance down the road? Particular difference on this case, 0.5 kilowatt a ton, and payback less than 5 years in the energy, just in the energy cost alone. Performance is a different issue. But just in the quantifiable energy cost alone, under 5-year payback on a facility, just to keep what was the original design idea. But again, it took the involvement of the facility management lead and the energy manager to show, hey, that's my budget down the road. That's what I've got to live with. And again, he took the total cost of ownership approach. Why? Because that's what he has to live with. And we were able to not have that one roll through. Really want to promote those best practices for everyone. We want to promote what is the best avenue for the owner, for our ultimate client. Engage all those project team members, and that all those project team members, and you probably heard that discussion if you were saw some of the definitions that we talked about on the commissioning guideline. We're talking the project team is the broad brush, and that project team includes the operators, includes the folks that are working down at the end of this whole process. Best practices. Work with the owners. Show them the impact of what can happen if you don't include VE or other contractual decisions into the documents. It may be a little bit more on the AE side, but it'll save you a lot more later. Also, from a construction manager's perspective, you'd be surprised probably at the number of RFI reductions that would generate, from particularly towards the end of the project. Identify impacts. We talk about constructability and schedule, not just the cost. Don't forget, that's a great first cost savings, but it doesn't tell us what happens overall at the end of the day. And then, again, we have to lead as commissioning providers. We have to lead. And sometimes that lead as a quiet voice to the owner. Sometimes that lead is a loud statement in a VE meeting. And sometimes that leads somewhere in between. But make sure that you lead, and it doesn't mean that you're the one chairing the VE meeting. But you should be driving the considerations beyond today, beyond first cost. One of the perspectives, we all have different viewpoints. Everybody on the project team brings that different viewpoint today, tomorrow, what they're considering, whether it's maintenance contractor, whether it's facility manager, an energy manager, mechanical contractor, design team, GC, all have different perspectives. But we have to focus on filling in the gaps and looking in that coordination on what the value is for the owner to embrace that total cost of ownership. One of my examples that didn't make it up here, it's really one of my favorites on a project. During the VE process, which again was done just with the construction manager and the contractor, decided to VE out the fiber backbone for a campus facility. 9 buildings. Somehow they thought they didn't need the fiber backbone throughout the facility. In today's world, any idea how many systems ride on a fiber backbone? All right, let me make this even better. How many systems in a healthcare facility ride on a fiber backbone, right? Exactly, everything. Well, they got down the road and new construction manager came in, and he's looking back through the VE and asked a few comments of person, decided this was a good idea. So the VE credit, $1.2 million. Went back and added it back in 2.5 years later into the process. All right. Cost was $1.2 million credit, $6.2 million add to put it back in. So that's one of those things of what happens when you don't think about really what that broader impact is. And again, it's one of those aspects also at the time when the new facility manager came in, he asked us at the time, how did you let this get through? He said, we weren't included. We weren't involved. But when we did, that's how you found out about it. It's those things we need to, sometimes it's protecting the project team a little bit from themselves, but it's taking the long-term overall approach of thinking of the tomorrow and that total cost for the owner way down the road beyond today. And that's the perspective that as commissioning providers we have to bring to them. We have to put that on the table for them. And that will bring me to the end of my set of points. I'm going to open it up for questions, comments. Go ahead.
I'll bring you the microphone.
Let's get the mic there to you.
So I know in DC, we work with a lot of developers as far as doing, Class A office space, luxury residential, things like that. A lot of times they're going to sell the building on as soon as construction is done. So how would you recommend advocating for total cost of ownership if we're not necessarily going to be working with that new owner at the end of the project?
When you're dealing with the developer and the turnover, every long-term decision becomes a little harder, right? And that has to be, you talk to them about same reason that you would talk to them about maybe better sustainability or more energy improvements, is that they can sell the building for more, promote that total, that tell the next prospective buyer, listen, we have made these points to reduce your total cost of ownership down the road, and use that to drive higher. We've seen that approach used by clients who come in and say may want a sustainability rating, hoping you use that to drive rents higher, or energy improvements, or just general facility improvements to drive rent higher. It's the same type of concept. They have to look at it as, what can I do to improve the marketability of this facility? And in today's real estate market, that's probably, especially office market right now, that's probably one of those things they want to take a look at, is driving that value. All right. Other questions? Comments? We went from the very back to the very front, so.
So one of my questions are, I know we looked at being based off the OPR and the owner's project requirement. We're having trouble, as commission agents, getting that information to make those decisions. So how do, I guess, we advocate to push the owners to get us that OPR information?
The reality is, the owners have their project requirements, and they may not have even realized that they have it, but they've thought through and established that. And sometimes we've had to pull it out of them, basically, to determine what that is. And it's not always in the form of a formal OPR workshop session. Truly, I'm really, unless you're dealing with a huge number of user groups, I'm not a big fan of those, but a more informal of, just pulling those pieces from them. They already had thought about them. They just don't realize they've thought about them. They don't realize they've already made a lot of those decisions and made a lot of that concept up front, until you start asking them, what are those pieces? And that's been some of our experience with that, is sitting there and saying, okay, what's your expectation for this? What are you intending for this? And a lot of times they've already done that, or they may have, instead of an OPR document, they may have 4 sets of project requirements that they've come up with from different groups that really define those things. And sometimes it's literally pulling it out of them. All right. Other questions, comments?
Mr. Smith, thank you so much for your presentation.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Glad you're here.